We thought we'd talk about the two California redwoods today. And when people hear the term redwood, they often think of one tree, and a lot of people don't realize there's two very distinct species. They are closely related, but there's two different ones. And the first one we're going to discuss is Sequoia sempervirens, the coastal redwood. Coastal redwoods are considered the largest living tree in the world. They can attain heights exceeding 350 feet.
Wow.
And another wonderful feature of Sequoia sempervirens is this beautiful bark, which usually is kind of brown with a reddish tinge to it, somewhat furried but very vertical looking. Those furrows are quite vertical on this bark. It's rather thick, several inches, and that means that this redwood is resistant to fire. It has many remarkable features. It resists fire, it resists insect infestation, it resists rot, all naturally. That's one of the reasons it has been so popular for construction. Also, its great height, long boards. And it also has one remarkable feature in that it can withstand flooding. Some of its native habitat, it actually floods on occasion. And when the silt is deposited after a flood recedes, Sequoia sempervirens has the ability to put out a new root system in that silt, which most trees are not able to do. Many trees would be killed by that kind of situation, and coastal redwood is adapted to it. The second native California redwood that we're going to discuss this afternoon is Sequoiadendron giganteum, which has several common names. It's often known as giant sequoia. It's also called giant redwood, and my personal favorite common name is big tree. The trunk on Sequoiadendron giganteum can get to be quite massive, and it can be 25 feet across. Whereas on Sequoia sempervirens, although they can also be quite large, usually the biggest recorded one is more in the vicinity of 15 feet across. So there's a little difference there. Well, notice that the foliage is another way you can tell the two native redwoods apart. Sequoiadendron giganteum foliage, it's composed of very small sort of triangular scales that overlap. They're quite prickly, and they radiate around the stem. So they're quite distinctive from Sequoia sempervirens when you get up close. And on the Sequoia sempervirens, what you might notice is that it has these basically flat sprays of needle-like foliage, and they're distinctive in that they're held in a very flat plane. They come out from either side of the main stem and extend out. They don't radiate around the stem. The cones also differ between the two species of redwood, and this is a cone of Sequoiadendron giganteum. They have very closely set scales in which are harbored the seeds, and they get to be about 2 to 3 inches long. The Sequoia sempervirens cones that we didn't get to see because there weren't any available are very similar in appearance. They're just smaller. They're only about an inch in size. Another reason that we came here today was to talk about what you might plant should you find yourself with a redwood in your yard, because it isn't one that we recommend for planting in most scaled residential yards. There are exceptions, of course, but if you do find yourself living with one, this is a wonderful place to see what kind of companion plants would grow well under redwoods. And one of them right here, we have a shrub that is Vaccinium ovatum, also known as Evergreen Huckleberry, and it has quite small leaves. It's kind of slow growing, but it will take the shade. It likes the one of the garden situations you get from the droppings. Redwood copiously drop their foliage, even though they're evergreen. They do drop their needles over the period of time, and what that does is, since it's a conifer, it acidifies the soil. So this plant likes some acidity in the soil. It has beautiful little tiny whitish to pinkish flowers in the springtime, and it does produce very, very small but edible wild huckleberries, so it's a really nice companion plant. And also we have a few things that will grow nicely on the ground. One of them is Oxalis oregana, which is known as Redwood Sorrel, and it has this, what most people would think is a clover-like leaf. It's evergreen, and it gets these beautiful, dainty kind of lavender flowers in the springtime. Another ground cover that works really well under coastal redwoods, Sequoia sempervirens, is called Asarum caudatum. Its common name is wild ginger. It's also evergreen, has these beautiful heart-shaped, rather large, glossy leaves, and it forms this beautiful mat underneath the redwoods and competes well with both the roots of redwoods, coastal redwoods, which are rather aggressive, so that is one of the challenges of gardening underneath them, and does like, again, the dropping from the redwoods that acidify the soil, and likes the captured moisture. We have lots of native ferns in California. Many of them coexist with coastal redwoods very well. One of them right here that we're looking at, this beautiful, nice, bright green new foliage, is Athyrium filix-femina, which is called Lady Fern, and it is winter deciduous and comes up in the springtime. So one of the reasons for this light new growth is we're seeing its new growth. It's new growth in the springtime. And over there is Polystichum munitum, which is called western sword fern, and it's an evergreen fern. It keeps its foliage all year round. It's quite substantial. It can get to be about 4 feet tall, so it's a good size, kind of sturdy fern. Another substantial fern that grows well under coastal redwoods is Woodwardia fimbriata. It's called giant chain fern. I've seen them 5 and 6 feet fairly often. They are not a tree fern. They don't get a trunk on them. They just have fronds coming up from the ground, and they are evergreen as well. One of the more delicate ferns that you can grow under coastal redwoods is called Adiantum aleuticum. It's also known as five-finger fern, and this is another deciduous fern that's just getting its new growth. And when these leaves expand, they will look like 5 or maybe 7 or more fingers. You might notice about this grove of Sequoiadendron giganteum, there isn't much understory. Unlike the coastal redwood forest, where there were a few shrubs and several ferns and some ground covers growing, here there isn't much understory. If you really want to have one of the redwoods in your garden, it might be more appropriate to choose one of the smaller cultivars that are currently available in the nursery trade. So there's a lot to choose from, and probably would be good to do some research because cultivars keep coming on the market all the time.